So nice to see some of our old friends, new friends. Welcome, everybody. My name is Layla Cartier. I am the Executive Director of Craft Now Philadelphia. Thank you for rejoining us for our first Friday preview on Thursday evening. I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying respect to the fact that we in Philadelphia are located on the lands of the Lenni Lenape people. And I would also like to welcome all of you and all of our presenters and invite you to enjoy the next hour and learn a lot about what's going on here in Philadelphia, our craft capital, which we like to highlight for its prominence, place, economics, and resources. One more thing, I'd like to wish you all a very unmerry one-year anniversary of quarantine, but without quarantine, we wouldn't have this program to bring to you tonight where we can convene virtually and talk about craft. So just a little bit to let you know while we're talking about First Fridays on a Thursday, we originally started running this program to bring everyone together virtually. And we want to keep it on Thursdays so that as we can safely re-enter galleries in the near future, we can still come together and convene kind of like a casual industry night, share what's going on with one another. And then we can also continue doing this in the future. And the great thing about this is we're going to be able to expand beyond Old City. And one of our first presenters tonight is actually a quick drive down to Delaware. So with those remarks, I am going to say that as a disclaimer, this is a public Zoom link. Anything is possible. We're going to do our best to kick out any Zoom bombers, but every time I say this, it gets more and more true. It wouldn't be an average night in Philadelphia without the possibility of something really wild happening. So here's hoping. And we ask that everyone stay on mute until the very end. And all of our presentations are going to be about 10 minutes, which allows us time at the end to unmute ourselves and have conversation and ask questions to our presenters. So put any questions or comments you have in the chat so we can filter through them. And with that, I'm going to introduce my friend Casey at Manatani Steelworks.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Casey Grumman here at Manatani Steelworks on Passyunk Avenue. Nice to see a lot of the same faces that I've been noticing as we do these first Thursdays, and it's been great. So we were talking a lot here at Manatani about what should we do for a cocktail today, and Jen, my general manager here, and I looked at each other and we said, hey, we haven't done like a super classic. Everything's been about, here's what we do at Manatani. Here's our signature cocktail. So today we are going to be doing a classic old fashioned, which is one of my favorite to make, one of my favorite to drink, and also a great one to talk about because it's super easy to build and it gives me a lot of time to tell you about spirits and what we do here. So at its base, when we talk about a cocktail in the history, you have to go back to 1806 to look for that first definition. And what you're going to find is that it's a spirited drink and it has 3 additional ingredients: water, bitters, and sugar. That's an old fashioned. So we're going to be making that today. For my spirit, I'm going to be working with Manatani's 4-grain whiskey. I'm going to be using 2 bitters, Regan's orange bitters, along with some classic Angostura. And for my sugar, I've got some Demerara syrup. For the water, I will be melting down and diluting some ice as we build this cocktail. So that's the first part. Ice into a mixing glass, and we will begin that building process. As you build here, one of the nice things about this cocktail is depending on your particular taste, there is a lot of room for variation in terms of how much spirit you want to deal with, how sweet you want it to get, how diluted you want it to be, but we'll kind of go with the basics. So I'm going to start with our spirit and go with 2 ounces of our good old Manatani 4-grain whiskey. This is a bigger spirit build than you're normally going to have in a classic cocktail. You're probably talking about 1.5 ounces of spirit, but no problem because we like our whiskey here. Second thing that I'm going to add in is our Demerara syrup. Because of the sugar content and the sweetness of the Demerara, I'm actually going to tone this down a little bit. I'm going to work with a 1/4 ounce. Some people like to work into a 1/2 ounce. If you're using a classic simple syrup, half water, half granulated sugar, you probably want to build up a little bit. But for this, I'm just going to top that off with a 1/4 ounce. I can always add more. And last but not least, we've got our bitters. I'm going to go with 3 dashes each of my Angostura and my orange. And then the most fun part of making this cocktail is the stirring process. So I'm just gonna bend down here and have you guys look in my glass as I stir. This is really one of the important parts of building an old-fashioned cocktail because you want this to dilute down to a level where it's palatable for the drinker. There's also a couple ways to serve this, and depending on how you serve it, you might need it just right as it goes into your presentation glass. So as I've stirred here for a little bit, I'm going to do what we call a straw taste. I'm going to take my straw, dip it in, take a little bit of that beverage and just taste to see where I'm at in terms of the flavor profile. For me, that build is just right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to strain this into my presentation glass. And for some people, they like their old fashions served up, which means you're not going to be adding in any additional ice. That means you're going to maintain the dilution at this point. But the downside of this is that over time, your drink is going to get warm. For me, I'm okay with a little more dilution, so I am going to use a large ice cube here to keep that drink nice and cold. If it dilutes over time, no big deal. I can always pour in some more whiskey if I feel like it. And last but not least, we are going to garnish that with an orange peel. And I am going to express those orange oils across my glass and just work around the rim so that I get a really nice citrus aroma when I go in to taste it. So that is your classic old fashioned from Manatani.
Thank you, Casey. Is it delicious?
Absolutely delicious. Hopefully I can see some of you guys when you stop down here to Passyunk.
Great. So thank you for keeping us hydrated. And just think back like a year ago when all the liquor stores closed, that's when we knew things were getting very serious, huh?
We're back.
That's so good. Well, now that we've all settled in, we can make our way to the first presenter, which is a short drive from Philadelphia. Leslie Grigsby with the Winterthur Collection is going to start us off tonight. Set in 1,000 acres, Winterthur's American Decorative Arts Collection features nearly 90,000 objects displayed in the magnificent 175-room house. Leslie, thank you for being here with us and taking us behind the scenes into collection storage.
Thank you very much for allowing me to join you this evening. I'm particularly thrilled to be with you because Winterthur is a huge collection of craft, ceramics, glass, textiles, metalwork, you name it. We've got lots and lots of objects, mostly from the 1600s through the 1800s. I am Leslie Grigsby. I'm the Senior Curator of Ceramics and Glass here at Winterthur, and I'm coming to you from the Ceramic and Glass Study Area. This is a place where not only do I have a couple thousand objects on display, but also we have guests come who will take classes with us. We'll sit down at the table, we'll handle objects that are from the museum collection. We also have 2 master's programs here at Winterthur. And one is it's the culture program for students who might be studying to become curators or auction house folks. And we also have the Winterthur program in art conservation. Both of these are in association with the University of Delaware, and they have access to all of our objects. So I thought that for this evening, since I understand that Craft Now Philadelphia has the theme of environmental effects for this year's programming, I thought I would try and pick some objects that to me represent environment. In this case, I decided to go with nature and different aspects of nature. The other thing I wanted to mention to you is Winterthur has a very strong focus since it began under H.F. DuPont's stewardship. It had a very strong focus on nature. He studied nature as a child, and he would build nature into his collection. We're very excited because on May 1st, we'll be opening a special exhibition that is called Outside In, and it focuses on that history of the interplay of indoors and outdoors at Winterthur, and also it's done in collaboration with our neighbors across the street, which is the Delaware Museum of Natural History. So I hope you'll be able to join us. Okay, I'm gonna dive right in now. The first object that I decided to share with you is this wonderful dish. It's made in what we call a soft paste porcelain. And it's a little bit different than the Chinese porcelains that have been being imported into Europe and America in the 1700s. It's a little different recipe that was being used in England by some factories. This comes from the Derby porcelain factory, and it dates to right around 1760. You can see the seashells. These would have been used to hold what they would call dry sweetmeats. Sweetmeats might consist of little bits of candy or a sugared nut, for example. Dried orange peel could go on here, and everyone at the table would reach in and grab what they wanted. It's before germs, so why not? You can all share from the same dish. They also could use small spoons if they chose to. From a craft standpoint, this is an extremely complex object. It has a center core, and then all of the shells and all of the moss-like elements have been added individually to that core. You perhaps can see in this image that some of the seashells were molded directly off of examples that were coming out of the ocean. If you think about shell collecting, it's something that must go back to the earliest times of humanity. And when you get to the Renaissance, they're collecting them for those wonderful cabinets of curiosities where they're gathering all sorts of exotic objects together. The Shell company that creates the Shell Oil Company actually began as a sales firm that was dealing in exotic shells and would eventually shift over to oil. So showing you that little piece, which I love very much, I'm going to set it aside and bring you another object that I have behind me on this cart. Its body and the lid. Now, this is an earthenware piece, was made in Staffordshire right about the same time as that piece we looked at a moment ago. And I'm not sure if you can see the entirety of the pot, but it is all decorated to imitate a cauliflower. And you can see the sort of meat of the cauliflower. You can see it's got a green glaze on it. This was a type of glaze that didn't exist before right around 1760. It was a new innovation where they figured out how to keep pigments like copper for this green in solution, rather than painting it on and then throwing a clear glaze over the surface. So this green glaze and also some other natural colors would all be developed right around 1760, just in time for a craze for nature themes. This is a press molded earthenware piece. You may be able to see, there's a mold mark, it's right by my finger, mold mark here. So it's a two-part mold for the body. It has a separately molded handle and spout, which are more of a Rococo type style, if that name means anything to you. This is a lead glazed earthenware. The porcelain we saw a moment ago is also lead glazed. They didn't have a lot of options in the West at this time, so you do have these poisonous glazes. Just going to get up for a moment. Grab another object here. Let me turn it around so you can get the full enormity of the crazy design. This is a soup tureen that's in the form of a cooked goose. It is again in a lead glazed earthenware, probably coming out of Staffordshire. And it's interesting because the colors that we see on here were experimental colors in the 1790s or so. And they were trying to come up with colors that could handle the same temperature that was used to finish the lead glaze. And they were saving money. basically, you want to fire as many aspects of the piece as you can at one time. You can see on this piece, if I turn it a bit, and hopefully he won't mind my directing your eye to an inappropriate area, but you can see the crazing that's very common on the lead glazed earthenware of this late 18th century period. This was a problem with the shrinkage between the body and the glaze, and I imagine that contemporary potters are always wrestling with similar issues, although there are some flexibilities and some improvements in the new glazes and colors. Okay, the last object I'm going to show you is this plate here that perhaps obviously shows an illustration from the Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare. This is a transfer printed plate, and increasingly contemporary craftspeople, ceramicists especially, are using transfers. And I thought that those folks might enjoy seeing this. It dates to the latter part of the 19th century, was made in England like the other objects that we were looking at. And this is sort of an unusual design. You are seeing a plate, obviously, and it's got a circular design, but in the center of it is a square. This was a way to get the greatest mileage out of the creation of the print. And that square was used for transfer printing onto tiles. Those tiles would be used to line fireplaces and the like. So I thought that might be of interest to you. And I'm going to release you to all of my colleagues who are presenting to you this evening, but I'm just thrilled that you allowed us to bring some of the old stuff into a program that's focused normally on contemporary wares. Thank you very much.
We are thrilled to show what you have down there as a resource, again, a capital, should we say, for contemporary artists to come and enjoy and learn from. And thank you so much for being here tonight. I know this will not be our last collaboration together, so this is a great intro to what is to come. So next we are traveling back to Old City, and our co-host Christine with Pentimenti Gallery is going to be presenting Making Marks, Figural Identity, Transfiguration, and Receptive Tactility, a group exhibition of mixed media works. And while she is presenting, I am going to share my screen with all of you.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm Christine Pfister, the owner and director at Pentimenti Gallery. First, I would like to thank Craft Now for inviting us to participate in the First Friday preview, and everyone for tuning in tonight. Tonight, I have the great pleasure to have with me the artist Nastasia Swift, one of the 4 exhibiting artists in our current exhibition, Making Mark, Figural Identity, Transfiguration, and Receptive Tactility. Nastasia will join the conversation to discuss her work currently on view at Pentimenti and her studio practice. So about the exhibition, we look to the art to help us make sense of our current world and to inspire us. For this group's exhibition, my curatorial process revolved around the concept that art is also a powerful force with which to promote social change. So I invite you all to visit us in person before the end of the exhibition. The show will close on April the 3rd. Thanks again, everybody. And I'm gonna go on and hand it over to Nastasia. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nastasia Swift. Thank you, firstly, Craft Now and Christine with Pentimenti Gallery for having me this evening. I'm always excited to talk wool and fiber and share my work. So thank you for having me. I'm currently based in Virginia. I'm doing a residency at the Contemporary Arts Network. And my work exists primarily through wool. I use a process called needle felting to kind of explore the many ways in which things happening around us, things existing around us define and disrupt our identities, whether that's history, the history of land and spaces, language, spirituality, um, and memories. I think a lot about um, shared memories and my own, and as a way of influencing the work that I make. Sierra, you can go to the next slide. I have a couple of slides and then there's a video at the end. So I'm going to try to talk for about a minute or two about each of the pieces so I can get to the video. But this piece, um, titled Passage, When Mama Lets My Braids Flow Down My Back, um, the face and the coiled neck is needle felted. And my work has always been figurative. My background is in painting, so transitioning into figurative work through fiber and sculpture was just kind of like an organic move. To be honest, in college, I've always wanted to do sculpture, and for some reason felt like me and contemporary sculpture didn't really fit in the same box. And then I learned how to needle felt, and this light bulb went off, and I was like, okay, this is my process. This is the thing I'm supposed to do to work three-dimensionally. So my work in one way or another is always presenting the figure, and with the pieces in the show, they're all kind of fragmented pieces of that. Um, and with this piece in particular, I was looking through a studio mate's book of West African mask and stumbled across a metal mask with just a simple coil around the neck. And the past few years, I've been thinking about the way these faces can kind of become their own shape and their own object outside of representing a person to create larger images. Um, and I do that a lot in the next piece. So if you want to go through the next two slides, um, and then I'll keep talking about this one. But I was interested in the people that are presented in a lot of these ancient sculptures and masks, and reinterpreting them through a lens of people that I know, and kind of reshaping for myself or challenging this idea of worship and spiritual practices, and thinking about how it's possible to see the people close to me in these really powerful objects. Um, and kind of channeling the energy of the person that I know that's special to me, depending on what they offer, and thinking about what happens if a girl named Bree is made into a rites of passage ceremonial sculpture, and hair being a way of transitioning this girl from girlhood to womanhood. So that's kind of some of the ideas I'm thinking through in this piece. Um, and again, you can see this little face that reappears. So I'm gonna go over into the next few slides um, with the piece Inner City, which I think, yep. So, and this is directly related to my comment about thinking about these faces as shapes and objects, and thinking about what it means for the face outside of the wool to be a medium. And if the face is a medium, then that allows me to think about what the faces can make. So it's not me making a painting out of wool or a wall hanging out of wool. I'm making a wall hanging out of faces. Then can I make a bowl out of faces? And just kind of challenging the way and rethinking this visual that is kind of embedded in my hand and my mind in terms of working, as someone who's been working figuratively for so long, and kind of tricking myself to think about the face in a different way. With this piece, it was the first time I got to try indigo dyeing on my own, which was a very interesting solo experience trying to get the indigo dye bath to work with me. But I have been experimenting with a few pieces, dyeing the wool after the face has been felted, and thinking about how that action mimics the way I would paint. because the wool, the dye can't get to all of the wool in the same way. So the sockets tend to be darker and suck in more color, whereas like the lips that don't have a lot of wool felted into them, they tend to be a lot lighter. And thinking about how that move subconsciously kind of makes me feel like I'm painting with this more physical material. We can go to the next slide. So yeah, and then with thinking of the faces as shapes and objects, thinking about, especially in this piece, um, the way shifting the size of the faces um, allow for not a flatter dimension, but there's a different kind of shift. I think there's already something happening with the fact that these are three-dimensionally sculpted faces, and then shifting from a large to a medium to a small allows me to think about different sizes of squares and the way it kind of descends down and ascends back up depending on which of the starting points of the piece that you're beginning with. So this piece has allowed me, and the series along with it, to think about other shapes outside of the face in a way that I wasn't thinking about when I was strictly thinking of myself as like a representational artist, especially through the work of painting or drawing. Thinking about shape and color and kind of abstracting these faces while also still allowing them to be and live as figurative work. So one of the third pieces in the show, this is a close-up of the indigo. So this is a performance mask made out of wool also. I started working performatively about 3 years ago, and starting with the all white felted faces, that's been kind of a reoccurring image in some of my work, but I really wanted to see it on the body and think about how the mask itself could activate the energy of one's body, but in vice versa, how the body can kind of bring these faces to life. We can go to the next slide. So there are just a few images of stills from the performance. In 2018, I put together a mobile performance that took place in Richmond, Virginia, that started along the port along the river, along the James River, where enslaved people were brought into Richmond. And then we took about a 3.5-mile walk through some of Richmond's kind of heavy historical spaces, the African burial ground, the old auction block, and then landed in a historically Black neighborhood called Jackson Ward that still exists in Richmond. So I often talk about this work as this kind of ancestral journey, and using these masks as a way of kind of like retracing the steps of Black womanhood and femininity within the city of Richmond, and thinking about the way the history of the spaces that I am attending school and living in, and working in, myself and the other 8 women who were a part of the performance, and how that kind of organically and intimately ties into the way we think about ourselves and the way we define ourselves, and the way we're kind of connected with each other and the land that we're existing on. So I'm going to stop talking so that way I can let you see the last 2 minutes of the short film that was produced with this performance. Also, if the sound doesn't work, I can just keep talking. Okay, so I'm going to talk over the sound. But so the short film. Okay, never mind. There it goes. Thank you, Layla.
To be a sister means to love I love these women. We women, we love. We give birth to love. We create, we build, we create, we shape love. When will we be able to take off our masks?
I feel like somewhere, at some time or another, I'm gonna be sitting on God's throne over here, just looking down. See all the things they went through in my life when I was down here. It's a heck of a feeling. Then I wonder what would happen if I died and then came back. Could I really come back? You know what I'm saying? And what would my family do if they see me? You know what I'm saying? If I really came back when I'm supposed to be dead. I mean, I have all kinds of thoughts in my head when I'm in church. And some of the preachers, they try to tell you about these things, you know what I'm saying? But I want to, experience them myself.
Cool. So the full film is 8 minutes. It can be found on my website, nastasiaswift.com. There's also a short documentary separate from the film that's 13 minutes, where you can see the mask kind of come alive through the 8 women that participated and all those that collaborated. And you can see the actual mask in the group show that I am in. Thank you guys for having me and allowing me to share my work with you.
Thank you so much. That was an incredible presentation, and my apologies for having been muted for the first couple of moments.
It's okay.
And I cannot wait to go and see the show at Pentimenti. All of the artists look really strong, and I'm really excited to see your work in person. So we are going to transition now outside of the city again over to Chestnut Hill to visit Bruce Hoffman at Gravers Lane Gallery. And tonight he is with Teresa Shields and her new exhibition, Appendages.
Welcome everyone. Chestnut Hill is still in Philadelphia. We still pay the taxes, so we're the furthest corner of the city that there is geographically. We have Woodward Museum right up the street, but it's easy to get here. You can take the SEPTA regional rails up, or a 20-minute drive up the beautiful Kelly Lincoln Drive. I want to welcome Teresa Shields. She's an artist that has come to me as a client. I met Teresa many years ago when she started collecting jewelry, and one day I was gifted enough to put her in an exhibition at the Cheltenham Art Center. She came walking the gallery and said, "Thank you for including me." And I asked her what she did and found out she was an artist, and I fell in love with her work. Teresa started as an embroiderer, still does embroidery, very intricate detail, hundreds of French knots in a very compact space. And she recently has started doing felting, which is a great coincidence and quite wonderful tie-in to the work going on at Pentimenti. In a funny way, Teresa said something about felting to me, and I responded that I've never responded well to felting art. And so she challenged me that I would like what she was doing, and the minute I saw images, I fell in love with them. So with that, I'd like to introduce Teresa Shields, and I'm going to throw a couple questions at her and let her talk about her show. You want to say hello?
Hi, everybody.
So the first thing that I think is great about, or interesting to know about Teresa, is the history of her education and how her artistic journey has happened and has moved into exploring techniques in fiber and textiles. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, I feel like I've always been an artist. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, and none of my family members are artists, but I was always surrounded by very project-oriented people. And my mom used to sew, and she used to knit and crochet, so there were always materials around. And I didn't necessarily follow in that tradition, but I would get an idea and I would have to make it, and there were always things available to do that. And then I went off to college and I became a fiber major. And after I graduated, I bounced around and I did a lot of different things. I did bookmaking, I did collage, I did painting, I did all kinds of things. And then about 8 years ago, I came back to fiber and it just felt like that's where I should be. And then in 2016, I took a 2-week trip to Penland School of Crafts where I learned how to make felt. And I knew at the time that it was a game changer. And that's in 5 years that I've just been experimenting and practicing and sort of going my fibrous roots again.
And you also have, through this, done some functional textiles that have been part of your vocabulary, meaning hats, and you've played with, you've used it as play as well as a very formal way of, do you find that it's an important element to you?
Oh, I love play has to be a part of almost everything I do.
Because that's a very big part of your work, but then that's what draws you in, but there's a very serious aspect to it.
Yes.
Beyond that, would you show your embroideries that are going on at the same time as the felted pieces?
So I try to get good lighting on this. There, that's good. This is a picture of a fig, and this was one of the first embroideries that I did when I came back to fiber. And if you look in the middle of the fig, the knots are all different sizes just to show that texture. And when I first started making the French knots, I would use the full size embroidery strand, all 6 strands. And then this was the first piece that I actually started making smaller knots. So by the time you get out to this edge, I don't know if you can really see it. These are all single strand embroidery floss strips. And the other difference was the first images that I made, the fruits were blown up. So this is larger, this is about 6 inches square. So this is larger than an actual fig. And then this is an example of work from 2020. And this is a tomato that's about 4 inch by 4 inch square. And every single knot in this is a single strand knot. So the difference is this tomato is almost actual size to what it is in reality, as opposed to my fig that is larger than reality. And the knots have gotten smaller. And I feel like my work tells me what it wants me to do. So for the last 2 years, the knots have been really tiny. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
There's a fascination with attention to detail in both your embroidery and your felting. And there's an intimacy to scale that happens that I think is not a very common thing anymore. And I think you're very good at that, and it's something that is part of your language. Is that an important element to you?
Yes, I think that if people respond to your work, it doesn't matter if it's large or small, as long as it's reaching an audience, because there's an audience for everybody. And I do value craftsmanship. That really matters to me. I actually fix the backs too.
And there's an obsession with process. I think process is probably the leading word or adjective in your vocabulary in what you're doing. And if you could explain what you're wearing. Yes. Teresa has been experimenting on different techniques and how to construct things.
So the felting that I do, it's wet felting, so it's a little different from the needle felting you just saw in the previous example. This is a hollow form. So when I lay this out, I lay it out on bubble wrap and I have a resist that's probably about that big. And I take the roving, just really thin strands of roving, and I lay it out in layers perpendicular to each other. And then I roll it up into the bubble wrap with warm soapy water, and you roll it to agitate it, and that's what makes it turn into fabric. So, then at some point, you take it to another tray of water where you start to work it by hand. So, and then at some point I cut the bottom out, take the resist out, and then it's just working it like this over and over and over. And so this piece also has a magnet in it. So each one of these little pods has a magnet. So these are not strung together, they just simply stick together to form a necklace. But each little pod was made individually. So when I do larger works, I tend to work in a modular fashion where I make small things and add up to a
And
greater.
how did the magnets come into play? Was that just experimental or?
It was, we were doing a renovation on our house, and most of the contractors who were working there had art degrees, so it was just an art fest. We were throwing around ideas all the time, and I had these little paintings that I was showing to the guys, and we were moving them around, and we were talking about making a rack for them. And then somebody said, "Oh, you should put a magnet on it," and everyone went, "Yeah, magnets." And we just love like that little click when they click together, and that was what motivated me to play with magnets. So that's been 10 years that now they're finally surfacing, and they're like a major part of the work.
And the pod forms and the singular wall pieces, they're, like I said, they tend to have a sense of play when you come upon them, but there's a much more serious aspect to them.
They're,
Would you explain a little bit
there
about
is
that?
they are quirky.
Yes.
They're quirky and playful. This is a piece called The Whims of Her Children, and it's probably the most autobiographical of the work here. And I look at a lot of things like bones and ribs and feathers and a lot of things found in nature. So you'll see sort of a reference to a rib structure here. And the idea behind this is that a mom might wake up in the morning and know what she wants to do for the day until her children wake up, and then it's a whole other ballgame because she has to do what her children want her to do or what her children need her to do. And I have 3 daughters, so there are 3 sets of ribs representing my 3 children.
Is that referencing appendage as the
My
title of the
children,
show?
yeah, my children are my
So there's multi-layers to appendage.
multi-layer, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So there's
every
many
piece.
aspects to that word, and I think it's very interesting when artists title a show, sometimes we deal with them burden to title something, and I'm like, just do Untitled, where you were very set in understanding that this is appendage, that that's where you wanted to go. One final question is, when you're doing work, what feeds what? Like, what inspires you? What's the next thing that you're looking to do? Is it the piece you just finished that gives you some kind of language or something that you want to explore in the following piece?
Well, 2020 was bad for the world, but it was really great for me because I made a lot of artwork. And I filled an entire sketchbook with ideas. So the new direction, I've been playing around with the idea of playing with antlers and eyeballs and combining them that somehow. And so it's either going to be really quirky and funny or a little creepy in the end. But I'm fine with however it comes out, whichever way it goes.
And one of the images that we've been using at press, and I think Craft Now used it, is Teresa's daughter in one of the necklaces she does body modification through, it's drag.
She just drags.
So it's interesting that what Teresa does has definitely influenced the next generation. And I think that's a great combination.
It was, yeah, my daughters have been watching the drag race on TV, and they got through their COVID by getting into drag and dressing up and having little house parties, just her roommates dressing up. So when she came home for the holidays, I wanted to do a photo shoot with her because I just sort of wanted to honor her new path and what she's been experimenting with too.
Pass it on. Yeah. I want to let everyone know that if you're interested in coming up and you are uncomfortable in crowds or would like to come up and talk to Teresa at any point, just give us a shout out, phone call or email. And Teresa lives in the area and she's happy to come over and talk about her work. And I want to thank Craft Now very much for including us in this tour.
Thank you, Bruce and Teresa. I highly encourage everyone to pay the gallery a visit. It is on a beautiful street and everybody needs to spend time getting out and seeing beautiful things. And Teresa, I imagine doing all that handwork over the last year was very satisfying. And thank you for sharing it with us tonight.
Thank you.
So next on our itinerary, we're zooming back to Old City and talking to my friend Nava at the Center for Art and Wood. And we are going to hear about their new exhibition, Tom Lozier, Please, Please, Please.
Thanks, Layla. I'm gonna, there it is. Can everyone see that? So first of all, I just found out that Tom is here with us today, which is a huge honor and surprise. So thanks for coming, Tom, when we talk about your show. No pressure. I want to first mention, so the exhibition is a traveling exhibition. The center is the last venue and therefore the last opportunity to see this show. We were the fourth venue on the tour. The exhibition, which was curated by Glenn Adamson, opened at the Museum of Craft and Design in San Francisco, and then was co-organized by the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. And the center's presentation of the exhibition was made possible through the Furniture Society and its new grant initiative, IFASO, which stands for Exhibiting Furniture and Sculptural Objects. So we are so grateful to all of these talents and efforts that they could come together to result in our hosting of Please, Please, Please. It opened in mid-February, so just a couple of weeks ago, and it will continue through the end of July, so stop by. I'm just gonna give you a very quick overview. First of all, about Tom. For many of you, he probably needs no introduction. Tom designs and builds one-of-a-kind functional and dysfunctional objects. And his work really is a pendulum between sculpture and function. And he's known for using heritage craft techniques and woodcraft, as well as cabinetry. And his work is collected by institutions all over the United States, including the Center for Art and Wood, as well as the Museum of Arts and Design in New York, the RISD Museum, and the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum. So we're just very, very thrilled to have Tom's work at the center. Tom actually studied for his BA from Haverford College, so this represents a kind of return to Philly for him. And I concluded this image here. First of all, here's an image of Tom in his studio. It's probably his previous studio, but you can see his fascination with the chair form, which resonates throughout the current exhibition. On the left, on the top, you see a work from the Details exhibition, which showed at the University of Hawaii School of Architecture in spring of 2014. And this is a classic example of Tom's work of the period, which involves really classic furniture forms that are then optically played with through carving and the application of milk paint in these kind of forms that really play with your perception. And of course, the drawers providing a grid that also provides some chance for subversion and play. On the bottom left, you see an image from an exhibition that was at the Museum of Wisconsin Art in the fall and winter of 2014 through 2015. It was titled, It Could Have Been Kindling. And again, you got to see Tom's skill as a carver and as woodworker, as well as his work in painting and covering the surfaces of wood and playing that divide between furniture and sculpture. So the etymology of the name of the title of the exhibition, Please, 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 comes from a 1975 program that was launched at the MFA Boston and by a curator emeritus named Jonathan Fairbanks. It was called the Please Be Seated program, and it involves the commissioning of seating that are installed for museum visitors to actually sit on. The collection now includes works by masters of American modernism and postmodernism studio movement, including Sam Maloof, Judy McKee, Wendy Maruyama, and Wendell Castle, as well as newer generation artists such as Vivian Beer. Here you see a photo of the accompanying cookbook. I think this was originally released in the 70s, and it features 62 recipes that are paired with works of art in the program. Maybe, Layla, we should do a Craft Now cookbook at some point. So also providing inspiration for the title is, of course, James Brown with his iconic Please, Please, Please number, which was performed in a number of venues as a kind of soul opera involving James, the King of Soul, dropping to his knees, being draped with a cape and escorted off the stage before bounding back up to pick up the song's crescendo. It's an amazing vision of performance, and when I started watching it, I had to watch it about 5 times and repeat. It was just so stunning. It's also possible, I never asked Tom this, and maybe he can comment on this later, but it's possible that the Smith song is also involved. I cannot confirm that at this point. But these multiple spirits of play and exuberance and theater and invitation underscore the atmosphere of the entire exhibition that's cultivated by Tom. For over 30 years, Tom's been imagining new ways for the body, furniture, and space to interact. Known for his investigations into conventional, welcoming furniture forms, he asks the key question of the exhibition, which is, if the furniture we sit on every day were totally different, how would our lives be different as well? He's intrigued by the balance between form and function, and his works all attest to this precarity in various ways. In the exhibition, we see folding chairs, seen here, which is an early series of colorful postmodern objects that perform double duty as chair and as wall art. And these works are from 1987, so they kind of anchor the idea of the exhibition as it develops over the course of Tom's career through the works on view. I love this centerfold image. It's so dramatic. So this is Dig 23. It's a work from 2015. And we view in the exhibition these more recent experimentations in furniture, which are made by joining natural edge slabs of wood with the handles of antique tools, as well as interactive stools that can be turned and tumbled and played with. And I don't have an image of that, but we'll get to that in a minute. We also have in the show playful illustrations of chairs that examine the form from every angle, and they are made using processes of pyrography and cyanotypes. They allow the viewer to consider the chair, which is repeated over and over as a motif so many times, it's almost becomes a kind of abstraction, like when you repeat the same word over and over in your mind and it loses all of its meaning. And then therefore it gives space for interpretation. We can also think of Joseph Kussot's 1 and 3 Chairs work of 1965, which deconstructs the familiar object of the chair into word, image, and object. So bouncing between the art on the walls, which we can call art conventionally, and art for use in play or furniture, Tom asks us to join him in allowing furniture to be art and also furniture at the same time. He invites us to play with the ideas and forms of his works, actually in the title, begging us to come in. So why did we bring this exhibition to the Center for Art in Wood? Not only is Tom a woodworker, setting him in his career notably apart from the design trajectory of the last 20 years, but his work is known as much for its cabinetry and joinery as it is for its playful, disruptive color and the optical tricks that embody the most playful aspects of postmodern design. And not only is Tom's work in the center collection, including this 2000 work titled Clock, part of a series in which Tom breaks out the functions of a clock into hour, minute, and second, setting up a kind of Venn diagram that parses out time and our perception of its passing. I also threw in this collaborative work, which is held also in the Center's permanent collection. It was created at the Emma Lake International Conference in 1998 by a number of artists, all of whom I listed here, and all of whom are quite notable in the world of art and wood, including the Holzapfels, Mark Spheri, Jean-François Escolon, Bobby Hansen, Craig Nutt, and a few others. So this is another, there's a whole story behind this work, and I can share it with you at another time, or check in with me later if you'd like to know about it. But it's basically a device, so there's design thinking behind it, that allowed Albert, who is here tonight, the executive director emeritus of the center, to place it outside the center when he needs to go and get a drink. And the title of the work is Back in a Minute, Wait Right Here. So there's an alarm clock built into it and a little stool for waiting. So it's another example of play and how collaboration can also play a part in the making of a work that is playful, but also functional. The exhibition itself for the center is important because it focuses our attention on the world of objects around us. Over the course of this last year, which Layla reminded us, we are marking at this point in March, we became ever more familiar with our own surroundings. But how much do we actually think about how design, the creative problem solving of another person or a committee, influences our behaviors or our thinking or our postures or our most intimate relationships? Tom's work, which is an achievement of woodcraft as well as an inquiry to which he is deeply committed. As we can see in the show, it's over 30 years of inquiry, shows us that craft and concept do go together. Works of fetish, like the Dig series of benches on view, and works that shift their shapes, like those folding chairs we saw, swing nimbly between categories of art, craft, and design. I hope visitors to the center will be intrigued and compelled by this bright, ebullient exhibition and maybe give the design in their own lives a second look. So I also want to add, I don't have an image right now, but I did want to add that for the first time, since, well, at least since I've been at the center, we invited the artist, the exhibiting artist, to take a look at the center's permanent collection and make a selection of works which are exhibited inside the gallery alongside this exhibition. So Tom made a selection of around 16 works, and he titled this selection Material Intelligent. And these works each inspired Tom and demonstrated deep or surprising investigation into pushing the limits or the ideas of the materials of wood or their forms. And it's pretty wonderful to walk in there and be encouraged to draw connections between the works, which really do speak to each other. You can identify the threads between them in a lot of different levels. So that's something to look forward to as well. You can view the exhibition at the center space on North 3rd Street in Old City, or you can also view it online in a Matterport tour. I'm not gonna take you on that tour right now because we would be bumping into walls. And we really can't have that happen in the exhibition, but I encourage you to explore it in your own time with your own devices. I can, after I finish talking in just a second, I'm going to post the link in the chat, and so you'll be able to jump right in there. Also, we just last Thursday held a talk between the curator, Glenn Adamson, and the artist, Tom, and they had a chance to put their heads together and really dig in deeply into the works and the ideas behind them that gave them shape. And of course, here we see a formative influence in Zumari. So please, please, please enjoy the show. I'm going to now, having concluded my tour, I'm going to take a drink of the signature cocktail, the Please, Please, Please. Thanks, everyone. It's such an honor to be here tonight and among such an illustrious and inspiring group of creative people and projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nava. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Cheers to you.
Cheers. If Tom's here, maybe he could say hello if he feels like it. Only if he feels like it.
I want to invite everyone to unmute themselves here in a second. I just want to say I couldn't be more appreciative to everyone that presented tonight for their commitment to the field and for contributing to this program. Please visit us on the website, craftnowphila.org. Follow us on social media at craftnowphl. Please stay safe. We'll see you again in April. And now everyone unmute themselves, but Tom, please say hello.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm here. It's nice to be represented in Philadelphia by my objects, even if I can't be there.
I would urge anyone who hasn't seen it to do follow the link to the conversation between Glenn and Tom. It was really clear that they worked hard at pulling together intellectually, kind of dumping Tom's mind. Glenn worked hard at probing, I think. And it really added a lot to the show and to the thought process of where craft is now and how it relates. And as Glenn does so well, really exploring the intellectual space out there.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tom, for doing that with Glenn.
It was pretty wonderful. I can also send a link. If there's not a link to that talk here, I can post one right now.
Interesting glasses.
There you go.
Perfect. Well, does anyone have any questions before we move on?
I'd like to throw in a comment. I wanted to address this to Nastasia. Nastasia, did you ever have any opportunity to work with Sonia Clark at Virginia Commonwealth University? Is she still here? Is she still there?
She is. She'll have to unmute.
I was talking, but I was muted. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't. So Sonia taught, she normally taught grad students. I actually was an office assistant while she was still with the department. So I sat outside of her office and would very often poke in and ask her all of the questions. And actually, I still have like torn pieces of sketchbook notes from talking to her. But she did teach a beading class. And I remember I couldn't take it because it was only for honors college students. And I was like, dang it, Sonia. I really wanted to take a class with you. But I still keep in touch with her. And it's great to talk to her. Still as someone who looks up to her, but also like now that I'm not just a student, a kind of a student professor relationship. I don't want to say she's a peer because I don't know if I'm at Sonia's level yet, but I feel like I'm on that track to saying Sonia's a peer.
No, I think you are on a very interesting level, and that level has to do a lot with African American recognition today, and the whole business of indigo, that whole story of the history of indigo, and Sonia was interested in all of those things, and you're interested in, and a number of other artists are interested in it too, that we've known over the years. And I think there's so much of these stories that are untold that are getting told, and they're getting told not just in a linear way, but in a way that has vibrancy, like the dance performance that you put on. My wife and I were talking about the fact, she said, there's no audience there. I said, no, the audience is you. The audience is the people watching this happening. And where it happens is actually not as relevant, but it is relevant in a different way. That is to say, being on the street and being in this normal place where a dance could occur anywhere, and a dance could transport you anywhere. And that's what I thought was so extraordinary about that piece, because it transported you to a completely different place, which was the place in your own head. And I love the idea that that was the abstract part. Very special.
Thank you for saying that. Actually, when I was planning it, a number of people asked how I would market it so that way there was a traveling audience, and that just wasn't, that kind of audience wasn't what was important. I was interested in the people who heard something happening and looked outside of their window or came and sat on their porch. We passed a number of businesses, cars were slowing down. So it was like, if you were out that day in downtown Richmond, you stumbled across this performance. And then you had lots of questions about what you just saw and what was going on and how it all took place. So yeah, I'm glad that stood out for you.
Oh, it certainly did. I mean, the other thing I thought was so interesting was my wife is telling me to shut up. Okay, so I'll shut up.
Someone else's turn. Someone else.
Well, Okay, I wanted to ask Leslie a question. Leslie Grigsby is still on. Leslie,
Nice to see the two of you.
Leslie, that's a,
Hopefully it's not making funny noises anymore. Can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you fine. That was just a special period of English ceramics. Wait. Oops.
Sorry, I was having a little trouble with the computer here. Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
I can. I didn't hear the first part of what you said, though.
That was such a very special period of English ceramics. And one of the interesting experiences I had when I gave a lecture to the conservation classes there, my fee was that I wanted to have access to every room in the museum that never gets seen by the public. And one of the most remarkable things was that particular period of English ceramics, which like bowled me over, like this fantasy stuff that was way out of any proportion. But how did that happen? Do you know anything about that history?
Do anything about the history of the English?
How did that particular period happen?
Yeah, that's actually my favorite period. We're obviously kindred spirits. A lot of what I've published over the years has been focused on English ceramics, and especially the pieces that are from the 17th and early 18th century. But one reason why we're interested in it here at Winterthur is because an enormous percentage of the ceramics that were in use in America during the colonial period were imported. Lots came from China, lots came from England, and Staffordshire in particular would become so prolific that it was sort of the equivalent of what we might think of as China today. So they had a huge range of wares, from very elegant, really costly things to things that were quite affordable and were more utilitarian. Does that answer at all what you were asking?
Okay.
I'm not sure if I lost you, but did that answer what you were asking about, Rick?
Actually, what I wanted to know was, why did this happen? I mean, how did these people come to make these really wild decisions? That was what I was curious about. And there's a creative force there. That's what I was getting at.
Yes. Well, a lot of these people were responding to other markets. If there is a taste for Chinese designs, then suddenly everyone jumps on the bandwagon. They copy Chinese wares that are coming over. They copy any design book that might have a pattern in it. And the English are particularly interesting in terms of ceramics because they would mix and match goofy things. So you might see a Chinese figure next to a pavilion, and then flying above it will be some European bird that never existed in the other part of the world. And there is a whimsical quality to many of the objects that make me love them.
Well, it was kind of a freedom gesture, I thought. Like, you don't think of the English that way, but you do. And then, you think about the Japanese being very formal, but then you think about the Japanese gardens and how abstract they are. Like, it's an opportunity to break away from who you think you are. I thought that was very interesting.
Absolutely.
So I'm thinking, I'm just wondering what the curator from Winterthur would think about if I were going to, what I just heard was in today's lingo, and I'm not taking other side, I'm just intellectually exploring the cultural appropriation of the English and all these things and throwing it together basically for commercial purposes. But on the other hand, the joy of exploring all those things, in a sense, a melting pot of artistic liberties, of seeing what it's like to bounce these ideas together. And how do we ensure today that we're not stifling the creativity of those things as we're looking at, quote, cultural appropriation?
That is a really complex question. I
don't mean to put you on the spot, but that's the first thing I thought of as you were describing that.
Well,
as artists,
it's very difficult because, of course, many types of objects that were produced in the period that Winterthur covers are viewed by current visitors and scholars and researchers in a quite different way. The materials might have been gathered by enslaved people. This is not true in England, but if you study China, the history of the people who are digging the clay were basically slave labor. And we have my colleagues who deal with furniture and talk about the harvesting of mahogany, for example. There's some horrific things that happened on the way to creating these objects. I think the most important advantage we have is if we are thoughtful and look at these objects carefully, we can try and think about them in each of those periods, not simply projecting from today's world, not exclusively projecting from today's world, but taking that very important point of view. And then what did people think in the 1960s? What did people think in the late 1800s about these objects that have been created in the past? And think about symbolism as something that evolves over time. 50 years from now, people are going to look at these objects and what's being created today with a different lens than we're used to using as well. So I think over time, to not project our feelings on others, but to try and understand the thought process over the period is a really important thing to do. There's a lot of effort here at Winterthur to try and improve our understanding and to bring a more modern light on some of these objects while not losing that history, because both are worthy of study.
It's a classic that it's interpreted through the lens of the current reader.
Yeah.
These are some really great comments. Do we have one last question from the audience or anyone that wants to say hello?
Great job.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I can't wait to see you again in about 1 month's time. Stay safe, stay well.
Thanks, Lila. It's great.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you again
Thank
soon.
you everyone for participating and brightening our day.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Thank you. It was lovely. Enjoyed everyone's free talk.
Nice to be with
Thank
you.
you. Thanks, everybody. Hi, Mom.